Dive in the deep end, it's time to defend your movie.
Hello, friends, and welcome to this week's episode of Defending Your Movie. I am your host, Jeremy Meyer. So here we are. We have made it to, December 27th is when this is going up. So I hope everybody who celebrates had a good Christmas, good Hanukkah, a happy holidays all around. I know I did. I went and saw The Matrix and Spider-Man, and I love them both. I'll be doing a more in-depth discussion on that kind of stuff. Probably my first episode in January will be like a end of the year wrap up, and what a crazy year it's been. I started posting this new podcast way back in August. And it's been so much fun. I've had such a blast with this show. It's kind of crazy that we're coming to the end of this year, and I've only been doing this since August. I mean, I know I had another podcast before this, and they went up on the same channel, so it looks like it's been going a lot longer than it has, but it's really only been about, half the year, like a little less than half the year. But I've been loving the show. I am very much looking forward to continuing doing this show. It's so much easier to do than the last one. And, I have a lot of fun doing it, and I've met some interesting people, and I'm working on lining up some super interesting guests for next year. So pay attention for that. Hopefully I have some good news on that front. But today we're going to be talking about our last movie of the year, which I have returning guest Brandon Prosek coming back to discuss one of Denis Villeneuve's more underrated film. Well, underrated is not the right word, because this is a very well-regarded movie, but it seems like it's a movie that not a lot of people have seen. Like, a lot of film buffs have probably seen it and stuff like that, but when it comes to his overall filmography, it's not one I hear too much about. And I remember when it came out, I kind of had no interest in it. I didn't really know who he was at the time. I look at the movie and it's like, okay, you got a cast that I really like. It's Hugh Jackman, Jake Gyllenhaal, like a lot of, and Paul Dano. A lot of really good people in the movie, but it kind of just passed me by. And that movie we're talking about is Prisoners. It is a great crime thriller by Denis Villeneuve. One of his first, bigger movies, and just one I feel like kind of flew under the radar when it came out. So we're going to sit down and kind of shine the light on this film, kind of an underrated gem in his filmography, especially coming after Dune. A lot of attention on him now, but let's not forget some of his earlier work that I feel like holds up to anything he's doing today. But before we get into that, let's get our plugs out of the way. You can always follow us on our social medias at Defending Movie on Twitter and Instagram. We have our Patreon at patreon.com/defendingmovie and our merch store at belowthecollar.com/defendingyourmovie. We actually have 2 new shirt designs inspired both by The Matrix and Spider-Man, so go check those out. I really love these designs. Big shout out to Dave Stankin, one of my good friends and, a designer at my day job, graphic designer. He's awesome, and he did some great work on the Spider-Man one. Love the work he does. I asked him just for a little help on one part of a design that I had already made, and he literally just remade the whole thing. So shout out to him for always being awesome. Be sure to go pick one of those up. So without further ado, let's get into our final episode of the year, looking at Denis Villeneuve's Prisoners. Yeah, so this is a movie that's been on my list for a long time. And, when I started this podcast, I always said the term underrated was negotiable. Because if you really look at this movie, it has $122 million box office. It's an 80-some% Rotten Tomatoes. It was nominated for an Oscar. But it's a movie you don't really hear about a lot for some reason. And now having seen it, I'm like, why didn't this thing why wasn't this everywhere when it came out?
Yeah. So I saw this in the theaters back in 2013, and well, I guess I should I introduce myself or
no? I do a pre-recorded intro, so
okay, cool. So 2013, I saw this in theaters. I remember the trailer. It didn't look like a movie that was. I don't want to say it didn't look special, but like I just saw all the actors involved, and it's like, who doesn't like a good kind of like detective story? Um, so I was interested enough to go see it, and yeah, I was blown away. Because just so everyone knows, the massive cast. It's like you got Hugh Jackman, Jake Gyllenhaal in the lead roles, Viola Davis, Terrence Howard, Melissa Leo, Paul Dano.
Yeah, which
Just
I didn't know that this was like a stacked cast. I knew it was Jake Gyllenhaal and what's his name, Hugh Jackman. I didn't know any of these other people were in it. So when I was watching, I was like, oh shit, like the whole time.
yeah, and then directed by Denis Villeneuve, who, for those who don't know, he went on to do Sicario, Arrival, Blade Runner 2049, and now most recently Dune, which I actually watched right before we
Oh,
recorded
really?
tonight. Yeah, I just finished
What'd you
it.
think? Non-spoilery.
Um, Good. It's clearly like a part one,
Yeah.
which they recently announced like part two is greenlit.
Yeah.
I see why someone like him, like I remember years ago, I don't even know how long ago, he's been wanting to do this movie for a while.
Yeah, that was like his passion project.
Yeah, and you could tell he handled it with care. Now, I mean, I'm someone who I didn't read any of the Dune books. I didn't see any of the other Dune movies or miniseries. So like it was
Mhm.
my first Dune exposure.
Okay.
Uh,
So I'm super curious how you feel about it then.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it, and you totally see why, because a lot of people bring up how like clearly George Lucas was inspired by this movie and stole a lot of
Yes.
stuff for Star Wars. And it's like, okay, I see why, like George Lucas, it's from what I'm seeing, obviously I still need to see the other half when they do part two, but like clearly Lucas took this and like did like a streamlined version, of a hero's
Yeah.
journey.
Not to turn this into the Dune cast, but we're going to talk a lot about Denis Villeneuve. But yeah, I have familiarity with Dune. I've seen the 80s movie, the Lynch one. I have not read the entirety of the book because it is a dry, slow read. It's pretty hard to get through. So I've never actually made it through the book, but I watched the 2004 sci-fi miniseries, and
Mhm.
that is a lot closer to the book. But I really enjoyed the movie. It was like a 4 out of 5 for me. Like I really liked it, but I was like, maybe with part two, when you see the whole thing, it'll probably go up for me. But I'm
Yeah,
excited to see his second part, like knowing
yeah.
where it goes.
So yeah, last thing I'll say on it, and then I'll use it actually as a segue back to Prisoners. Um, the only thing I would say, knowing that it's like a part one of part two for Dune, um, I think that they could have shaved good 15-20 minutes from this. There's like a
See,
lot of
I'm the
slow.
opposite.
Well, okay, I like, and I'm not saying that in a bitter like hated it in any way. I
No,
just
no, no.
think it's more so there was some slow moments. There's a lot of visions and dreams and like things that aren't actually happening. It's like
A lot of
even if they
setup for the next movie, basically.
yeah, it's like if even if they just took off like 10 minutes, I think it would have just helped. Um but that's something like actually if you look at Denis Villeneuve's other movies, like and actually this movie was also Prisoners was 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I was
Um
surprised by that.
And I just also within the last like month or two saw Blade Runner 2049 for the first
Hmm.
time, which that's like 2 hours 45. So like he clearly gets
He takes his time.
he gets to do long movies, which like I do have to say I've never quite understood, and maybe the Dune movies will put his name more on the map, but like I've been following him ever since I saw Prisoners in 2013, and like each movie he's made I've seen since then. I haven't seen some of his non-American movies. This was his first American one.
Yeah.
um but I've seen now officially all of his American movies, and like he hasn't made a bad movie. And like
No.
I don't know why he's not talked about. Like it feels like a lot of people know Christopher Nolan's name, or like they know obviously Spielberg, like they know some directors' names, but I feel like besides film nerds like myself who have
Yeah.
seen everything he's done, no one really knows Denis Villeneuve. No one knows this director who honestly I think, like I said, hasn't made a bad movie yet.
No, and I think part of that leads to, because the same, I would say most film nerds and stuff know who he is, but like his probably biggest mainstream hits were Sicario and Arrival, because Blade Runner 2049 didn't make a ton of money at the box office. It made enough, but
Yeah,
compared to
which I have to say, Arrival. If you want to do Arrival for this podcast, I'll come back on, because like I thought that movie should have been how Amy Adams won an Oscar. I think it should have been like Best Picture. That was like, I can't remember what else came out that year. I think it was 2016. I'd have to look.
Yeah,
but like that was one of my top 5, if not one of my favorites this year. Whereas like 2013, Prisoners was my favorite movie of 2013.
Yeah, I would be curious to look at what came out in 2013. And actually, I do have a way, because I have a letterboxed list for every year where I did like my top 10 movies. But that list will probably be revised, because I think this would go right near the top, because this is exactly the kind of movie that is like for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm obsessed with like letterbox lists is just something to do. Okay, Wolf of Wall Street was my number 1, which is a good movie, but I would maybe put this above that.
Well, so I guess, non-spoiler like yet, like the plot of this one is basically Hugh Jackman, Terrence Howard, and like Viola Davis. It's like these two couples, their 2 daughters go missing, and Jake Gyllenhaal is Detective Loki, which LOL, Loki.
Yeah.
Is the detective who's trying to find the daughters, and like Paul Dano's kind of suspected of it, and where like Hugh Jackman, who's not an officer, like feels like he has to take the law into his own hands, because
he's the father of one of the kids, and
he knows that it's like, if you don't find something within the first week, you could never find them again. Like some even say the first 72 hours, like
usually like 48 to like 72 hours, something like that.
Yeah, and so it's very much like, I don't want to say Zodiac, because it's not a serial killer, but it's like in that sense where you don't really know for sure who took the daughters until like the last 20 minutes,
if
of 2.5 hours.
Yeah, and like, so I texted you, because I was watching this while I was working, and I paused it at like an hour and a half because of something, and I was like, I feel like I know how this is gonna go. I was totally wrong. I was completely wrong.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, once I don't know if you like to do some non-spoilers.
I assume most people have watched the movie if they're listening to it or something. Yeah, and this is also came out in 2013, so we don't have to hold back.
So, what was your guess? Because I wanted to ask you earlier, but I was like, well, let's see.
Yeah, my assumption was, so it was the moment where Paul Dano says, "My name isn't Alec or Alex or whatever."
Okay, quick question on that. Did you have the subtitles on?
I did.
Okay, so let me just say this. This was the 3rd full time I've seen this movie. I saw it in theaters once, and then on DVD maybe a year or 2 later. The reason why I haven't seen, even though I love it, the reason I haven't seen it too much is because the movie I like to watch start to finish, like one sitting.
Yeah.
Which technically I did it in 2 sittings this time, but like it's also, and I'll go further into this. It's a very gripping, and like it feels very real,
very much so,
very haunting. And so anyway, I never heard that line, "I'm not Alex," because like he mutters it. It's like very
he
low,
talks very like in whispers, basically.
Yeah, whispers, mumbly. And then what's problem is like then Hugh Jackman starts kind of mumbling too, like, "Oh, whatever, just tell me." So this time I paused it because I was like, wait, what did he say? I put it on, and he said, "I'm not Alex." And I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Even though I knew the ending, it's been years since I've seen it. But I was like, if I had known that far in that he says that, that's like a pretty big thing, which is like, I'll admit that's even something I had to just do for Dune now on HBO Max.
I'm at the point in life where I pretty much watch everything with subtitles now.
Yeah, like I try to do it without my first viewing, and then if there's lines like that happen, I'm like, all right, no, I gotta know what they said. But like, I just gotta say, doesn't that like, I know we're writers, but like, doesn't that bother you when like the sound department or direction of the actors, like they don't make sure that there's moments like that where the audience don't catch what they say?
Yeah, and I mean, somebody needs to have a talk with Christopher Nolan after Tenet about that. But yeah, like if I
Yeah.
didn't have the subtitles on, also I was watching it with headphones because I was watching it at work, and I was using AirPods, so they're pretty decent headphones, so I might have picked up on it. But yeah, if it wasn't for the subtitles, I totally might have missed that line.
Well, yeah, I'll just say that being the first time I saw this movie with subtitles, that's the first time I knew that's what he said, you
Yeah.
know.
It's always interesting to like rewatch movies with subtitles. I'm like, oh, that line has been wrong in my head all this time.
Yeah. So, it's a detective story. Oh, sorry, I interrupted. What was your guess? What did you think?
When he said my name, I'm not Alex or whatever, I thought Dave DeSmulchin's character was going to be revealed to actually be Alex, and that Paul Dano was
Polka dot man.
Yeah.
Which that's how he's going to be referred. That's how he's going to be referred to now. Also,
yeah,
Dune, by the way.
Yeah, I knew he had worked with Denis Villeneuve before, but I didn't think it was in this movie. It kind of just wasn't in my head. But which I heard an interesting story about him from like a Kevin Smith podcast, that he doesn't have an agent, that every job he's ever gotten is because they called him up and offered it to him, just because people like working with him so much.
Yeah, I mean, clearly he has, he's well liked, but also it's just he has a very distinctive look.
Yeah. And like The Dark Knight is his first movie, actually, when he was just that like crazy prisoner.
Yeah, and that's what's like, I don't know, it's something that you could have all the talent in the world, but if you just look like everyone else, that could be either a really good thing or a really bad thing.
Well, what was that that girl's name from oh god, what's the name of it? The dancing movie. Why am I blanking? It's fucking classic. The Nobody Puts Baby in the Corner.
Oh, Dirty Dancing.
Dirty Dancing. That actress, she like her whole thing was
didn't think we'd be talking about that in Prisoners.
It definitely didn't. But
don't know how we got here.
Yeah, but that actress, she had Jennifer Grey. She had a very distinctive look, and then she got a nose job, and her career like dried up because she lost that distinctive look.
Interesting.
Yeah, that was always like the thing with her.
Yeah. But, so you thought he was the real Alex, and then like he was the one who did it? Or?
Yeah, I can't remember I think there was something else that I thought was pushing me in that direction, but I was like, oh, like something somebody said. Maybe it was Melissa Leo's character like dropped a line or something about her son, I think, who had died or whatever. I thought maybe that was like a lie, and that he was actually their kid. And like, I thought, so I also told you there was something I knew about the ending. I knew about the hole under the car, but I didn't really know the context of it.
Oh, okay. But so you had no idea it was going to be Melissa Leo.
No, I thought maybe she was in on it, but I was like, well, maybe she doesn't know. And I thought maybe it was Paul Dano and Dave DeSmulchin working together. Like because I remember when the movie came out, I listened to a film podcast, and they had this whole debate about the cops went over to that house and searched it. Do you really think they wouldn't have found the hole under the car? And I was like watching it with that in the back of my mind. I was like, you know what? I don't think they would have found that.
Well, that's the thing is like she had like a car over it, it's not super obvious. So
yeah, why would you bother moving the car when it looks like it hasn't moved in ages,
Well, and also it's just like the assumption being like, yeah, sure, the car moves, but it's just like parked there,
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's interesting. It's been so long since I've seen the movie that like I forgot that like they did actually confirm that like Paul Dano is that other kid on the block who went missing.
Yeah.
Like, because I think the reason why I just in my head, I think used to think that wasn't the case is because it was like 25 years earlier. And then I was like doing the math. I was like, well, how old is Paul Dano supposed to be? Like, would the math check out? But like, I didn't see there's like a newspaper clipping that like confirms it's like,
Yeah, there's a scene
it's
where
him.
Gyllenhaal is like, or Detective Loki is going through like stuff on the computer and saw it. And that I kind of picked up on afterwards. I was watching like some YouTube stuff after I watched it, and I didn't put that together at first, but I was like, oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So I like, obviously like they sort of connect the like the symbols that Gyllenhaal keeps finding on things with like the necklace of like the dead husband, but then it was like the dead husband was like killed by like that father,
Yeah,
Father Patrick.
that was
I
something
remember
I
like
kind of
not
missed.
knowing how that connected, I was like, why would
Yeah,
this father kill him? But it was like that's just like a, you know
a coincidence type situation.
Yeah, and then he was like, "Oh, he used to take kids and whatever," and like I just never put it together. It's like, oh, well, that's Melissa Leo's husband that she mentioned, like had a fight and he left.
Yeah, and I think that is a victim of the runtime, that by the
Mhm.
time you get to the end of the movie, you kind of forget about that.
Exactly,
And
because then it just becomes about like there's the super freaky scene where Gyllenhaal's like driving in the rain,
yeah,
blood in his eye, and he's like trying to get to the hospital in time because he knows that the little girl was poisoned and wants to make sure that they can save her. And I say freaky not in the sense like, oh, jump scare freaky, but just
no,
like, can you imagine being
intense.
in that high tense situation where you're driving in the rain, like sure you have sirens, but like there's still traffic, and it's also winter, so it's probably icy. And yeah, it's just like I like how Denis kept us with him for like that scene. It wasn't like a long drawn out like action sequence. It's just like he shoots Melissa Leo, he gets hit also, and then like that drive, and like there's no car accidents. It
And
doesn't
I
hit
was waiting
anyone.
for it.
Right? Yeah, but that's the thing is like you're on edge because it feels like it could happen at any moment.
Yeah, it's like that whole scene was because like I said, I was watching this while I'm at work, and I literally stop and just like lean over my printer, and I'm just watching my phone, which unfortunately is how I was watching this. Spoiler. Um, and I'm just like, oh my god, like what is going on? Like I'm waiting for the car accident, and like
Right?
the editing in the scene where they're like zooming in on the windshield, and you're only seeing kind of like how his vision is like focusing on just the windshield and not past the windshield.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's so tense, and I felt it the whole time, and I'm sitting there like breathing heavy.
Yeah. So the reason why I haven't seen this movie as much, despite it being my favorite movie that year, I would used to tell people, I think I told my friends before we watched it on DVD the second time I saw it. I say, like, this is one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. And everyone's just like, oh, what do you mean? Like a horror movie? And I said, no. Like, see, horror movies usually don't get me
No.
because unfortunately, and most people can know this secret. It's not like a wide, super big secret, but like I took an audio class at film school, and like I know that what they do for jump scares is like they literally turn down the audio and then put it at nothing right before it's about to get loud, so it's
Yeah.
supposed to scare you. So
Jump
like
scares
my
are just
body,
completely ineffective for me.
exactly. It's like sure, like actions may be like freaky and like whoa, that's fucked up, but like jump scares don't get me. This scares me because this feels so real, and I don't have kids, but like it just made me think of like God, this would be my worst fear if I do have kids.
Honestly,
Which go
the
ahead, I know what you're gonna say.
yeah, so as we are recording this, my wife is 7 months pregnant, and I am literally the first like 30 minutes was like the most stressful like moment of my life was watching this.
Because
Just the
I clocked
idea.
it on it's about 10 minutes in that the girls go missing.
Yeah. And literally the scene where they're like trying to figure out like, oh, did they go to our house? Are they like hidden in the house? Like them just searching ever. And so I got lost as a kid. I don't think I've ever told this story on a podcast. So I lived in a very small town in, kind of southern Illinois, and we're about a half hour away from like the closest, I guess what you would call metropolitan area. You might be familiar with it. It's called Kankakee, Most people around here kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
know it.
yeah.
Yeah, so that was where we would go to do like our shopping and stuff because it's where all like the Targets and Walmarts are versus our small town. So I was 5 years old, and my mom and my grandma dragged me shopping, and at the time we had a full size van, and I fell asleep in the back. And so the very back of the van, it was like it was a seat that could then like fold down into a bed, but it had been broken for years and was just like stuck in the bed mode. But there were two like middle row seats, and I fell asleep behind one of the seats. So they stopped to use a bathroom at like a Wendy's, but they parked at a store next door, which was like just some tile store or whatever. And I woke up and they were gone, and I just assumed they were in the store that they were parked in front of. So I went in there looking for them, and they came out and assumed I was sleeping in the back and left without me. And
Oh,
I I come out of the store and I see them, and like there's an intersection like right there, and I start bolting towards the intersection where they're parked at, and obviously they can't see me, and I'm screaming for them, and then the light changes and they just leave. And as far as I know, I'm dead. Like this is just my life now. I just am on the side of the street.
this is
And
my life now.
yeah, like legit, some woman just sees this 5-year-old crying on the side of the road and stops and offers to take me to the police station. And I just got in her car, and luckily she took me to the police station, and they were able to contact my parents. But like, I've kind of been on the other end of this situation, and just now with like a parental feeling in my heart, like watching that scene, I was just feeling my stomach drop out watching it.
Yeah, and I've been in moments myself where one of my neighbors, one of their younger kids, they thought was missing, where like the whole neighborhood was looking around, for her, going to like the park
Oh
nearby
wow.
and just and like all that. And like it's so dumb, but yeah, basically she fell asleep under a blanket. And like, because the thing was, we went into the basement, like looked around, didn't see her, and then we just assumed she was outside somewhere because it was summer.
Yeah.
And so it's like we weren't like yelling in the basement for her, but yeah, she was just asleep under the blanket. But like it was just that moment of like the whole neighborhood kind of looking around. So when Hugh Jackman and like Terrence Howard are like going around the block, like, you seen him? It's like so freaky to me. And so even though this movie's 2.5 hours, it takes place over, I think, 6-7 days, I believe they say.
Yeah, I think it's a week because I remember the scene where he's yelling at him in the car. He's saying it's 6 days. It might even be close to 8 days by the end.
Yeah, and so the reason why that's so freaky is because it's sort of known that when someone goes missing, if you don't find them in the first 2-3 days, you could end up not finding them, or if you do, they're probably dead. And
Yeah.
so it feels so long because like they show all the things where like entire towns in like orange vests just like combing a forest, and shows people doing like a candlelight vigil and like all these things where it just feels so long and drawn out, like every moment matters. And also like obviously the parents aren't sleeping that well, if not at all.
Yeah.
And so like it just brings you in, it literally like hooks you and like makes you feel like, I'll admit I got emotional multiple times in this movie, because then parents start like lashing out at each other, that
Yeah.
they're grieving and like they're afraid, so they're blaming each other. And it's just like it's an emotional roller coaster. And like I'm not saying this to deter people from seeing it, but obviously you got to be in a certain mindset and mood to see this movie. But I think it's so well done because it makes you feel like you're part of that family with like the missing daughters. And because we don't see some missing person movies, they'll show the point of view of like the missing person and like,
Yeah.
oh, they're alive. Like we literally don't know if they're alive until one of the girls gets free, and then right at the end the other one is saved. But like, so that means 10 minutes in, I clocked it, they go missing. And let's say it's around 2 hours when we finally get the first kid back. It's like that's almost the entire movie not knowing what's going to happen, not a check-in. We don't know if they're alive. There's other times where like they find bloody kids' clothes and
in their clothing. Even.
Yeah, and like different things like that it's just like you don't know. Are they dead? Are they, what is happening?
Which the explanation of like David Desmulchin's character is something that like I kind of butt heads with a little bit. It's like everything about him in this movie seems a little convenient for like plot sake, to like as a way to throw the audience, but it wasn't like anything I thought was like bad, but it was like, oh, in retrospect it kind of didn't add up to a whole lot in the grand scheme of the plot other than a red herring.
Yeah, and so like the brutal part of this movie, and honestly it's maybe like if you're gonna look for flaws, it's maybe something that I think just goes a bit too far, but I know that that's kind of like what Denis is going for with the movie. Is so Hugh Jackman knows that Paul Dano knows something, and basically when they introduce Paul Dano, there's like this, they know there's this camper because the kids are playing in a camper at one point. And then when the cops first showed up, he tried to drive away in the camper. They caught him.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it looks immediately suspicious. He's a weird looking guy. Like he's got like this longer hair, these big glasses. He seems awkward. Only to find out they're like, oh, he has the intelligence of a 10-year-old, even though he's like 30. But like, that's not adding up. And Hugh Jackman even asked, is like, well, I don't understand. Like, why would he run away if he didn't have anything to hide? And then like he blurts to Hugh Jackman in the parking lot, like, they were sad when I left. So like he knows that Paul Dano knows information. So he ends up taking matters in his own hands because he knows that like every second they're gone could be like leading towards their death.
Yeah.
So like he kidnaps Paul Dano's character and brings him to like this abandoned apartment building that he inherited from his dad, and just starts torturing him. And like, it's very brutal. And
when
like,
they pull the like sheet off his face, like later in the movie,
yes,
like because I'll be perfectly honest, I totally sympathized with Hugh Jackman until I saw that dude's face, and I was like, oh no.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like if they didn't show that, and if they didn't go that far, and then obviously like he sets up the little chamber where like he turns on the hot water, and sure, he ends up getting information that ends up helping figure out what's going on.
But at the end of the movie, he's kind of brutalized this innocent, like mentally challenged man.
Yeah, no, it's very don't get me wrong, I'm not like I'm not glad what he did, but
just how it makes you feel about it.
Well, yeah, exactly. And like that's the challenging thing, I think, Denis trying to say is like, how far would you go for your children? And like also like Hugh Jackman's character is a religious man.
Yeah.
And he even mentions at one point before he drinks, like he's like, I haven't had a drink in 10 years. And so like he's clearly like, he says like the Lord's Prayer at the beginning, like he's clearly like a religious man, but he's driven.
He has like a lot of like religious, like he has a cross hanging from his truck, there's stuff all over his house. I don't know if you picked up on it, but there's references to the fact that his dad killed himself.
Oh yeah. So they do show that in a newspaper article that Gyllenhaal finds.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I it's like, how far will this guy go for his children? And like, you even see that like Jake Gyllenhaal's character even gets extremely wrapped up in it, because even though he's not like emotionally like family or anything, he still just like knows that like there's these two innocent little girls who are like what, like 9-10, like they're young
at most.
And he knows that every moment counts. And there's even moments where like maybe it's just like the nerdier thing in me where he clearly doesn't get warrants and like goes
houses because he just
gets like you know, like he sees something and he's like, he doesn't say it, but it's almost like in my head, he goes like, oh, that's probably what he's going to use as an excuse for like
Yeah.
why he denied having a warrant. And, you know, he
The one with
also
the
like,
priest, like most of all, is like, oh, he sees him
yeah,
on the ground, so he can go in. It's like, well, you mind if I search the place to like a passed out dude?
yeah, and also he roughs people up, and so it's like he's doing what he can as well, but still like mostly with the law. But yeah,
Yeah,
Hugh
and
Jackman's character fully goes over the edge.
yeah, like I like the idea of, you know, kind of exploring how a religious man is kind of losing himself, and you kind of see him regain it at the end when he finally figures out what's going on. He starts like praying again and stuff like that. But also like Gyllenhaal kind of coming from the other perspective of, you know, he's a cop, he's kind of following things logically. And I'll say like so I fell down this YouTube hole of watching police audit videos, which I don't know if you know what that is, but it's essentially like people who go out and have encounters with the police, or a channel that takes like a recorded encounter with the police and they kind of grade it. And the specific channel I watch is called Audit, the Audit. I'll shut that out. But they basically, you know, they play the encounter and then they like pause, be like, okay, here's what the cop's doing, here's what this person's doing, here's what's wrong or right in the situation, here's the actual law that pertains to it. And it essentially is all about like making sure police are doing their job and not violating rights and stuff like that. So like I've been watching a lot of stuff about police and the way they should be talking to people and stuff. And Jake Gyllenhaal is actually very believable for the most part when it actually comes, like, especially in the beginning when he's talking to Hugh Jackman and he's like, look, I understand, you know, I'm trying to help you. And like the way he's trying to say stuff without saying a lot, you know, it was very believable. But yeah, I definitely was like, oh, you couldn't just walk into this abandoned building like this without a warrant and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I think that's, you know, that's very realistically done. Also, like they don't say where they are, but clearly it's like somewhere where like winter is a thing, so it's not like sunny California.
There might have been a
Um
reference to like the Midwest, but I don't think there's an explicit reference to where they are.
and there's reference that it's like a smaller town because at one point, you know, he wanted, I think it was when Paul Dano was released, he wanted like cops to be watching him, you know, to see
Yeah.
what happens. And that's when no one is, and Hugh Jackman takes him. And when they find out that he's gone missing, he like goes to the captain. He's like, why wasn't he under surveillance? He's like, I can't afford to have an innocent man like watched.
Yeah.
And he's
Uh
just like, well, clearly something happened, you know.
yeah, so the Wikipedia does say it's in Pennsylvania.
Gotcha. Okay.
Which it, you know, watching the movie, it looks similar to the town that I grew up in, like just a small town in Illinois.
Yeah, so it's not like this is like an FBI investigation where he has unlimited resources. It's like for majority of the movie, he's on his own. You know, like sure the
Yeah.
town is looking for the kids and you know everyone knows about the case, but like he's the one going door to door. He's the one, you know, trying to keep track of everything. He's the one that has to question, you know, each people they bring in for point of interest. And so like that's where, yeah, like this movie really is about Gyllenhaal and Jackman's character. And it's a mystery why neither of them were nominated that year for Oscars. Like I think at least Gyllenhaal deserved, you know, like I don't
Yeah.
know.
They got one nomination and it was cinematography, which the
Yeah.
movie was shot by Roger Deakins, so absolutely. But
Yeah.
yeah, like either one, like Hugh Jackman for sure. This feels like it should have been his like shoe in.
Yeah, at least for nominations. Don't know about
Yeah.
winning. I'd have to look at what else was nominated that year. But like I remember when this came out, I was like, well, this is clearly going to be nominated for picture, maybe
Which it was
director.
not.
Yeah, yeah, and it was only nominated for cinematography, and I was so confused. And like this was on lots of like top 10 lists that year.
Yeah.
So like I was so confused. Like this is probably one of the first years that like I remember like seeing a movie in theaters, loving it, thinking it would hit all the points that Oscar, you know, awards want. yet was pretty much snubbed. And it was like that, like probably was around the time when like my hatred for like award shows began, because I was like, well, this is just clearly incorrect. Yeah.
Well, so looking at, so I actually was near the Wikipedia link for the awards for that year. So the acting awards went to Matthew McConaughey and Jared Leto, both for Dallas Buyers Club, which I've actually never seen. But like even screenplay, like they nominated like American Hustle, which is I think one of David O. Russell's like kind of lesser films. And like
Yeah,
this
very over. That's a very overrated movie.
Yeah, like it's fine, especially coming off of Silver Linings Playbook, which I think is fantastic. But like I never understood why that movie got so much attention. Like, cause even nominations for Best Actor, you got Christian Bale for that movie, and again, he's great, but I don't know. I would have definitely crammed Hugh Jackman in there over him.
And looking at, I pulled up what was for Best Picture. It was like 12 Years a Slave 1, American Hustle, Captain Phillips, Dallas Buyer Clubs, Gravity, Her, Nebraska, Philomena, and like Wolf of Wall Street. It's like, I know that we're
you could have lost like 3 of those movies,
right? And that's the thing, is like, even 7, 8 years later, how many of those are we really talking about anymore?
Yeah,
so, like,
I haven't
that's
even
one thing
seen
that's,
some of these.
Yeah, whereas that was, I think, the thing that really bugged me, was because if it was nominated, maybe more people would have like seen it, and it would have just like been acknowledged more. But like the why I always like say like this one is so underrated is because like it has performances, I think a gripping story, great direction.
This should have been an
cinematography,
easy screenplay nomination. Like it's so well written.
Well, yeah, and it's just, it feels so real, and it feels like it hits everything it needs to hit. I think the only reason you wouldn't like this movie is if you just aren't in the mood for something this intense, which is understandable. That's why I've only seen it fully through 3 times, because like it's it's not something that like if you're in a like maybe a dark place, or you're unhappy, or you're maybe in a really good mood, it's not something you throw on willy-nilly. It's like, oh, I want to sit and go on this like gripping detective story.
Yeah, and like, so me and my wife, we don't have a lot of the same interest in movies, but I'm watching this, I'm like, oh, I bet she would really like this one, but I gotta wait until after she's not pregnant anymore before we watch it, because she won't be able to handle the stress. Like,
yeah, it's I would try to recommend it to people whenever I could, but I would often have to warn them. I'm like, but just so you know, like this is the type of movie you're getting into. So
I do the same thing with like Blue Ruin. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it's a very good movie, but it's like a feel bad movie.
Yeah, it like, whereas like, I don't know, you think of a movie that's more of a mystery, like for example, like Knives Out. It's like, that's a movie I'd recommend anytime, because it's fun, and it's not over the top like intensity. This, however, it's like, I always just tell people from my personal things, I'm like, this is one of the scariest movies I've ever seen, because it feels so real.
Yeah.
Like I know it's not, but it still just it brought me into like the psyche of these parents and like these family, like if a young family member went missing.
Yeah, and like I feel like I know people in my life that are like the characters in this movie. Like I 1,000% can point to like 3 people growing up that'd be like, oh, like Hugh Jackman in this movie was them. And like not Jake Gyllenhaal so much, but like like even his wife played by Bria Bello, like I knew people like that. Like it feels so familiar to me. And like not a lot of movies, even other stuff that take place in kind of like small town rural areas, like they don't grab me as much as this one did.
Well, if you think about, I think about like, what's really popular like in America, like true crime stuff, or murder stuff, or like Law and Order SVU, Law and Order, Criminal Minds, like all these shows where like horrible things happen, but like usually they're like obviously anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour, and they wrap up, and you know how they're all going to end. Whereas like this one is obviously 2.5 hours, but I'm like, it's in the same vein of that stuff. So like, I just don't know why more people wouldn't be into it. Maybe it's just
You
like
know
the
what I think it
title and
was?
marketing.
I think it's because it predated the Serial podcast by a year. That's when everybody got their true crime fit like itch, you know.
I mean, I feel like it was still going before then, but yeah, that's definitely where it was like fully obvious that it's like, yeah, everyone's into everyone's into that stuff and like that genre, if you will. Um, yeah, I just think this is an example of a movie that unfortunately, when it's not a box office hit in the beginning, when it's not nominated for anything, and then like say it doesn't develop like a cult following within the next few years, it just falls into like the abyss that is like a billion movies coming out every year. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
And
And
like I don't
go ahead.
I don't remember what the big box. So this is right after summer in 2013. It came out in September. It made 122 on a 46 budget. So certainly it wasn't like a slouch or anything. But you're just coming off the summer high, and this movie kind of sneaks in there. Like I can easily see it flying under the radar because you're like predating award season and like just post summer.
Well, the like typical awards movies are released around September to December. Reason being, they know that the closer it's fresher in the award, like the Academy's like minds, and so like that's why they do that. Like there's a reason why movies are released certain times of the years. Like summer is obviously bigger action movies, trying to get people to the theater. Beginning of the year is usually the crappy movies because less people go to the theaters January, February. That could be changing depending on little things here and there over the years. But it's like
And
this
one
was
big
clearly
thing.
this was clearly set up to be an awards contender, but it just didn't hit that high, and then therefore disappeared. And like, here's one thing I'll say: for everyone I've met who has seen this movie, I have not heard anyone not like it. It's
No,
just
I've only ever
unfortunately,
heard that it's great.
yes. And that's the thing is like, and sure, that's only a select number of people that I'm like polling, but it's just the fact that, um,
But it's also
it'd
like
be,
podcasts and stuff. Like I've heard people talk about this movie over the years, and like I said, it's been on my watch list for a long time. But it really feels like not a lot of people know about it.
I think that this is one of those movies that like, I think I started seeing it again when people were doing like top tens of like the 2010s. Like sometimes this would make like, or maybe top 25, top 50, this would like squeak in there. But this is definitely something that I'm like, people love Zodiac. They love Seven, they love Law and Order SVU. It's like, you think this would be just right along in there. Like one thing I'll say, for people, if you're like on the fence about it, is like this movie's not funny at all. Like there's no like
No,
side moments where like a joke is cracked or like whatever. It's like, this is just
they pick
brutal.
a tone and they stay there.
Yeah, they stay there. It is like a thriller, like it is edge of your seat mystery, that is just, you have no idea what's going to happen until the last minute.
Yeah, and that's like mystery movies are my favorite, and like I put this movie right up there with things like Wind River and like stuff like that. I really love these kind of drawn out movies where like you don't really know what's happening until the movie like tells you, you know. And I found like I want to be guessing throughout a mystery. Like I don't want to be able to figure. Like I said, I thought I had it figured out an hour and a half in, and I was the most wrong by the end. And that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is like I didn't know what was going to happen when I first saw it either, and I just, I don't know. It's something that like I'll forever bring up as like an underrated movie, because it's not that it's underrated in the sense that like critics didn't like it. It's like,
Yeah.
no, critics liked it. It
The
just,
people who saw it love it. It's just not enough people are seeing it.
yeah, it's you really, like I said, you could fall into a few categories for being like growing an audience. You're either like super popular right out the gate, everyone sees it, or you're an awards darling that like people maybe didn't see it in theaters, but they watched like the Oscars and they're like, hey, that's getting a lot of nominations. Maybe we'll rent it, or years later, a cult following, or if a movie is like more in the range of like so bad, it has like this, ironic following. It feels like those are like the four ways you can really fall into like being known, and this unfortunately just didn't fall into any of those.
Yeah, and like you look at it from a technical perspective, it's a masterclass in filmmaking. Like we've said before, Denis Villeneuve does not miss, and like he put together a great team. You got I'm blanking on his name. I said it earlier.
Roger Deakins.
Roger Deakins as the cinematographer. Like it looks great.
Yeah.
And like it just completely drew me in from like right from the beginning. Like I am completely invested in everything I am seeing on screen. These performances, like I will never understand how Hugh Jackman didn't win for this movie.
Yeah. So part of me, part of my hope, we were talking about Dune earlier, is like Denis Villeneuve seems to be a guy that no one knows, like in the general population. He's not a Tarantino, he's not a Scorsese. Like I feel like if Dune is popular enough and people love it, that hopefully everyone will be like, what else did this guy do? And then like maybe this will have like a resurgence, because people generally liked, like you said, Sicario, Arrival, Blade Runner 2049. It felt like people liked it, but it wasn't like,
yeah, it didn't set the world on fire the way they hoped.
Exactly. And so because this was just too long ago, I'm hoping that people are wondering what else he does, and then they go back and watch it, and then everyone just is like, hey, did you know this Prisoners movie is actually really good?
Yeah, it's got Wolverine in it, man. Come on, check it out.
Well, and you look at like someone
And
like
Mysterio.
yeah. And then someone even said like, yeah, there's the scene where he's pressing Paul Dano and they're like, oh, Mysterio's questioning the Riddler.
I can't wait to see his Riddler.
Yeah. I think, well, and so yeah, with that cast, the reason why it's just like so nuts is it's a cast of like award darling people. Like Hugh Jackman has been like nominated for things.
Viola Davis,
Terrence Howard
won.
Melissa Leo, I think, has won for supporting actress. Paul Dano, like literally all the main key players have at least one nomination, if not multiple, if not wins. So it's truly a movie that like, even if you're not super big on the plot and you just want to see like good acting, because I think like I will say Viola Davis and Terrence Howard aren't as the focus,
No, but they're really good when they're like on screen. Like I actually really enjoy the moment where Viola Davis is kind of brought into the circle of torture of like the people who know about it, and she's like, no, I want to see him, I want to talk to him, and then she's like, hey, we're not gonna help him do this, but we're not gonna stop him either.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is like Terrence Howard really fights Hugh Jackman the whole way. He's like, this is not right, and like Hugh Jackman's like, he knows something, and Terrence Howard just keeps going back. He's like, but you don't know, like you don't know, and I think at the end, because like there's a brutal scene where Hugh Jackman is trying to console his wife, and she starts like lashing out at him, blaming him, saying like, you said you could protect us from everything. And like you learn later on, like Gyllenhaal sees his basement. He's sort of like a doomsday prepper.
Yeah, he kind of hints at it in the beginning where his got dad,
like food.
Yeah. His dad hints it's what is it? It's always be prepare for the worst and always be prepared or something like that. They keep saying.
Oh, it was pray for the best, prepare for the worst.
That's it. Yeah, that's like his motto.
Yeah, and so like you see the basement and he's got like all this canned food. It's almost like if a zombie apocalypse were to happen, like they're stocked up.
Yeah.
And so it's like this brutal moment when she's just like, you said you could protect us, and then at the end of the movie when like the daughter's safe and like they don't know where Hugh Jackman is yet, she's like, thank God for what he did, because it
Yeah.
helped bring him back. And in a weird way, so like I was just thinking about this, like think about the turn of events on how Jake Gyllenhaal like saved their daughter Joy. So Jackman kidnaps Paul Dano
Yeah.
and then tortures him. And then basically Gyllenhaal finds that place, the abandoned apartment building where he's keeping Dano. And when Hugh Jackman runs from the hospital because he figured it out, which honestly it's like he should have just yelled like, the Joneses, we got to go to,
Yeah, I don't know why he felt
like
he had to do it himself.
well, I think it's because he didn't trust the cops or something, but it's just the fact that like, I don't know, maybe he just thought they were going to screw it up. But
Yeah, which
he
you just
also-
reminded me of another favorite moment of mine, but continue.
But also it's just then he doesn't exactly go through the plan well. Like he just tells her like, I don't want to hurt you, and she's like,
Yeah.
already has the gun on him, and I'm like, idiot, why didn't you pull the gun on her? But anyway, so anyway, he runs after Melissa Leo, in which case Gyllenhaal's like, oh, I know where he's going, goes to the apartment building, finds Paul Dano, and then the captain's like, go tell Melissa Leo that we follow Paul Dano. So that's when Gyllenhaal just happens to go to inform her of her, quote unquote nephew being found, goes into the house and like puts it all together.
Yeah, because he sees the photo of her husband with the necklace and recognizes it.
Yeah, so it's like, yes,
which by this point in the movie you've totally forgotten about, probably.
Right? It's a very small thing. So like it's a weird turn of events on like how the day actually got saved,
Yeah. Which I was watching a video about this, and they kind of talk about like with Jake Gyllenhaal, it's all about persistence, that he like even to the end, like the cops wrap up the scene, but he still hangs out there because he's just always looking to see that the job is completely done, and that's how he ends up hearing the whistle.
Yeah. Which like, okay, what'd you think of like that ending? Because like they didn't fully confirm that he found Jackman. Like, what'd you think about just ending on that moment?
So part of me assumed that you're just going to be left with Hugh Jackman never being found. Like they could have ended that in the hospital, and I think it would have been fine, because I do think Hugh Jackman, while he is the father of the child that was kidnapped, he's not a good dude. Like he kidnapped this dude and beat him, and like that honestly would have been fair if he ended up dying. Like I read the ending as he hears the whistle. He's obviously probably going to go check it out. They're probably going to rescue Hugh Jackman and blah, blah, blah. Like I was fine with it. I liked the ending. Like I feel like it would have been fine if they also didn't include that. Like I think either direction would have been fine. Because like Jackman's character does deserve to get punished.
Yeah. And so like, that's the I like you said, I it's not that I would have been happy if his character died, but it's like at least he did what he did to save his daughter, and like by running there and then by taking weirdly by taking Paul Dano, that's what led to Gyllenhaal finding Dano and then going to the house and then finding the daughter. So it's like weird
in a way
how,
they
like,
couldn't have done it without each other,
right? But like it is awful how far he went, but also it I know that Paul Dano's character is like a 10-year-old, but like doesn't it make you wonder like why he didn't say anything until like way later in the torture?
Yeah,
because he does say like, I'm not Alex, and he does say something about a maze, so like
which that is the whole confusing connection between the mazes and David DeSmulchin and like what's going on with him. Like that's the stuff I want to pay attention to on a rewatch to see if that makes more sense.
I will say, because like I sent you that article, I think I was like 30-40 minutes in, and I'm watching, and I was like, you know what, this is around a time where like I didn't really go Google like, you know, reviews and like what people online thought of this movie. So like I just did like a quick search and I found that article, and they were talking about like the ending explained, and then it's like where it connected the dots, and I was like, oh, you know, like it's something that like I could totally understand people not connecting the dots, because also it gets to a point where it's like as long as the day is saved, I think people don't really care about
Yeah.
like how we got there. You know, we've gone on this long, painful journey. We just want the kid to be okay.
Yeah. And honestly, the last little bit of the ending there feels like it might have been like a producer, like, hey, give it a little more of an upbeat ending.
Yeah.
And it feels
Uh,
like a compromise, maybe.
yeah, I don't know. It's something that I just it makes me wonder, like, is Paul Dano just so was he just like so damaged in his being taken, you
Well, didn't
know?
they say he had an accident when he was younger or something?
They
Like,
well, she said that, but it's like one of those things. It's like, was she lying? You know?
yeah, and I'm wondering if they like kind of messed up his head since they kidnapped him or something. Like, or did they do something to his brain, basically?
Yeah, I mean, but then there was like the moment where Hugh Jackman's watching Paul Dano and he's taking the dog out, and then he like
Yeah.
just like lifts up the dog all creepily, and then like
Yeah.
you think
I
he's
was like,
gonna
oh, is he
hurt the
about to
dog.
hurt the dog?
Yeah, and then he just like puts it back down and just walks. He's like, "Come on, girl," you know, and it's just like, oh, so there's something more there, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And like I said, not saying he deserved the torture that he did. It just
No.
makes me wonder why he went through all that when, because that's the thing is like Hugh Jackman's character didn't do it because, you know, he likes hurting people. He just is like,
No.
I will do anything. I will give my life to find my daughter.
Yeah, like when he brings Terrence Howard into that, he's like, you have to make a choice. I already made mine. Like he knows what he has to do. And like
Yeah.
when he's doing it, he's seems very regretful. Like he's like, why are you making me do this to you? Just tell me. And like he doesn't want to be doing it.
Yeah. And that's where it's just so it's just such a good like question. It makes you wonder with parents. It's like how many would go this far, or like what else would other parents do, you know? Because like we kind of have all the different like angles. It's like whereas like the mom is more so like struggling with sleeping and she's
And
taking different like
self-medicating and stuff like that.
self-medicating. You know, Jackman does drink, you know, Terrence Howard is out looking a lot, and but then like regretting everything he's doing with like the torturing. And so yeah, it's like you see all the different angles of grief, and I don't know, it's just it's a very interesting character piece in itself, but also a mystery story with good performances, shot well, directed well. So it's like what
Yeah.
it's not really missing anything for me. I'm
What
not
more
saying
do you
it's a
want, people? Just like this
yeah.
movie?
And I'm by no means saying it's a perfect movie, but it's just yeah, it hits on like pretty much every cylinder.
Yeah, and this movie is extremely my shit. Like when I'm looking for some like really serious stuff to watch, this is exactly the kind of movie I'm looking for.
Definitely. So I mean, yeah, I guess what do you think that someone like if Denis if like Dune really goes off, and like depending on what Denis Villeneuve does after Dune, because he's doing Dune Part Two, like do you think this movie like will be found later, or like
I
what?
hope so. Um, I'm curious how Dune is doing. I mean, it made a lot of money, like for a pandemic movie.
Mm,
Um, I really hope, and I'm super curious what he's like interested in doing after Dune. Like he got to make his like magnum opus, and so like
yeah,
what do you do after that? And
right.
I would be curious. Like Arrival was a pretty big hit, and Dune seems to be going that way. I hope the second part kind of pushes him in that like upper echelon for general moviegoers.
Yeah, general moviegoers, and who knows, maybe even Dune will be nominated for some things too. But yeah, it's just certainly interesting. I would also.
Oh, I also want to shout out the score for this movie is really good. It's pretty low key. It's not like hitting you in the face or anything, but I really enjoyed it.
Low key.
Oh god. So the entire time I'm watching this movie, I'm like, they didn't just spell it like the god, did they? And then of course they did.
Yeah. This one quote said, this movie is like cruel, relentless, humorless, claustrophobic. Like it is.
I don't read that as a bad thing.
Yeah, no, it's not a bad thing. It's just, yeah, it's a certain mood. But I do have to say, I not only recommend this movie, but I recommend anything in his like American filmography. I haven't seen his previous movies before Prisoners. The other movie he did in 2013 was called Enemy with Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah.
That one had a questionable ending for me.
It's a very metaphorical movie, and that's not for everybody, obviously.
Yeah, but like otherwise, like I would recommend, Sicario's kind of like a different sort of like
I
police
love
drug
Sicario.
related story. Arrival, he starts getting into sci-fi stuff, but I also like it's a movie about trying to learn like language to speak with extraterrestrials. Like it's
Yeah.
not like an action piece. And then obviously it's like Blade Runner. Like I could take her to leave it with that. It's like if you like
I really like Blade Runner.
Second.
I don't know how many people share this opinion, but I know I am not the only one. I think Blade Runner, the original, is kind of boring, and Blade Runner 2049 is the movie I actually wanted from that franchise.
Interesting. Is it
Blade
because
Runner
it had like more action or like
no,
what?
I just think it was more interesting. Like, I don't know. Like the first Blade Runner, I think is fine. I think it was recognized at the time for its effects, which are incredible to this day. Like they hold up really well. But I just think the story is not that interesting in the first movie. And I don't know, the second one, maybe it's because it's a mystery and that's what I'm looking for. And the first one kind of isn't. The first one is just like I don't know, he's hunting these robots type thing. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I really enjoy the mystery. I really enjoy like the characters in the second one. And like there's some twists in there that I legitimately could not figure out. And I don't know. I think 2049 is the superior movie.
Interesting. Yeah, I would probably agree to that, but like also I was more so disappointed in the first Blade Runner because it got overhyped for me.
Yeah, I think that was a thing. I just saw it too late.
But yeah, like here, like when I say he hasn't made a bad movie, like that's not hyperbole. Like obviously Rotten Tomatoes isn't an exact science, but
No.
like I'm looking at this: Prisoners 81, Enemy 71, Sicario 92, Arrival 94, Blade Runner 2049 88, Dune's sitting at 84 right now. It's like
Yeah.
it's not like there's one movie that's bad in there. So like even if you don't want to watch Prisoners, I would just say pick up anything on his filmography.
And I would say Prisoners, like as far as general audiences go, Prisoners is probably his most approachable. And next to Sicario, maybe.
Yeah, I'd say maybe Arrival,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's debatable. So here's a question, because I am also a fan of Letterboxd. Out of like his filmography, because you've seen all of his movies then now, right?
So here's where I show my shame. I have never seen Arrival.
Oh well,
I am away.
Perfect.
So,
you can watch it for this podcast.
Yeah,
and we'll talk about it.
I was familiar with the short story, so I am familiar with Arrival, and at this point it's impossible not to know what that movie's about for me. But it's just it's eluded me one reason or another. I've never gotten a chance to actually sit down and watch it. And Enemy I haven't seen, but I'm super familiar with it, but I've seen all the others. I've Blade Runner, Dune, this now, and Sicario. I've seen all those.
Gotcha. So out of all the Denis movies you've seen, which would you say is your favorite?
It'd be between this or Sicario. this being so fresh in my memory, I'm leaning towards this, but I remember really enjoying Sicario, but I've only seen it the one time.
Yeah, well, same. I've only actually seen Arrival once, but like I loved it, and I think it's a perfect excuse to rewatch it for this podcast. But yeah, I think that's a movie. That's my number one. Prisoners is two, and then like probably Dune, and then like Sicario right behind. But like those are all like I bet on different days those top two or three could be finagled around depending on, like you said, which one I recently saw and just debated because like they're all just top of the line.
Well, good news, Arrival is still on Hulu.
Nice.
So I might actually try to squeeze that in this weekend.
Yeah, I would. I own that one, so I'm definitely gonna give it a rewatch.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Prisoners. Like I love a good mystery, and I haven't a mystery thriller even, and I haven't watched one in a while. So this was kind of exactly what I was looking for. And like, we're pretty near Halloween as we're recording this, and I'm a big Halloween guy. So like, while it's not like a horror film, it is kind of horrifying in a lot of ways. So it was a good time to watch it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And like the weather of today also reflects just the mood of this movie.
Right.
Like it was a perfect storm of like watching.
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, I mean, if I don't know how many more good things we can tell people about this. Like, how much more can we defend it, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you should really just watch it. I don't know if it's streaming anywhere. I bought this a little while ago, which
That's
is another reason
too. I feel like I've never seen it as an option anywhere.
No, actually, so it says it might be on. I have Hulu open, and it says it might be on Hulu, so I'm gonna check right now. Prisoners, it's on Hulu, so yeah, you can watch it on Hulu.
Well, there you go, folks. No excuses.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's carve out the 2.5 hours. Definitely do it in one sitting. But and like you said, know what you're getting into. It is not a feel good movie, even though it is a more like hopeful ending than like this kind of movie might normally get.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, but I'm so glad I finally sat down and watched this because of you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I finally have a recent rewatch and like connected dots that I hadn't connected before. Like, even though I'd seen it twice before, there are still things that I caught this time that I didn't catch the other time. So it's worth it. And yeah, I can't say enough good things about it. I think because it was my favorite movie of that year, if I did like a top tens of the tens, which I think I may have done that for my podcast.
Yeah, probably.
That I believe this is on there, if not like top 15, like of like the decade, because it's just that good.
I'm looking at my top 10 for 2013, and I'm like, oh, this definitely belongs near the top, because that must not have been a great year for movies, because my list is pretty weird. But the movie I was talking about earlier, Blue Ruin, is actually number 4 on that list.
Yeah, so I just checked. Yeah, when I did my podcast top 10 of the 10s, Prisoners was on there. So
yeah, and honestly, the only movie that would be fighting with is my number 1 is Wolf of Wall Street. I would really have to compare those two, but yeah, it's really good. Probably, I would say deserves better than an 81 even on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. But it's just one of those things, like I said, because it doesn't fall under an awards darling or a box office, huge thing. It just fell into the abyss.
Yeah, and I'm actually looking forward to like rewatching it, since I did like watch it at work. Like, I want to sit down and do like a definite, more like honest watch at home.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I might try to see if I can get my wife to watch it after she has the kid.
Yeah, well, it's if anything, I feel like at no point is it going to be a good point if you guys are having a child.
No, it's like while she's pregnant, she has to worry about being stressed while pregnant, and then after having the kid, she's going to have to worry about the kid. So yeah, it's one of those things, but I feel like afterwards is still probably better. But all right, man. Before we get out of here, did you want to do your plugs?
Yeah, I shall plug away. So you can catch most of my content on Entertainment Buffet. That is my production company, where we we have videos, we have partnerships with tons of podcasts that you can find on there, including Defending Your Movie.
Hey, that's us.
Um, yeah. As far as one thing we do have coming is I am working on a graphic novel we'll eventually release. But if you happen to be in the Chicago land area, on November 17th, our one comedy show, Brews and Bad Movies, is coming back, where we have two amazing, like, club level headliner comedians that perform a little short stand-up show, and then we're going to be watching the live action Super Mario Brothers, and the comedians will be bashing that movie. And so that's going to be at the Lincoln Lodge in Chicago, Wednesday, November 17th, if you would like to check that out.
All right. Yeah, and I think this is going to go up on the 8th, so that should be perfect for everybody to go check that out.
Awesome. Yeah, that would be much appreciated. It's our first show back. We were doing it monthly pre-COVID, and we're finally returning from hiatus.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. I'm actually, like, I sent it to a buddy of mine who's a massive Super Mario Brothers fan. But he is a coworker of mine, and I think we have a AEW sale whenever that pay-per-view is around that time. So unfortunately, we might be stuck working. I'm hoping we're not.
Full Gear is the 13th.
Yeah, and we're having like a 5-day sale around then, just in time to just be done finishing punk shirts currently. We'll have to start printing more. Because this is the first week I've gotten out at 6:00 in maybe 4 months.
Well, it means business is booming, which is good.
Yeah. It's just my body is not keeping up.
Well, hopefully you can relax, watch some more movies.
Yeah, that's the plan for the next week or so. But yeah, so be sure to check out all that stuff. You can also find the podcast on his YouTube, as we said, and Entertainment Buffet. But thank you, Brandon, for watching or for coming here, and thank everybody else for listening.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Always.